Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rulebooks for contracting with the Defense Department, and we have been moving sequentially. We started with DFARS Part 201 in January, and we will be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you do have questions for our speaker, we will have his information on the last slide of the presentation today. And a special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. Virginia PTAC at JMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTAC can offer. Set-Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss important sources, sought, and solicitation announcements, providing details so you can jump on the hot ones. Every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. Also, please join the Reston Chamber of Commerce Government Contractors Council for regular meetings. Also, please stay tuned for information on their very popular B2G conference in May. Please contact Alicia Fields with the email shown on your screen if you do have any questions. Federal contracting is a relationship game. Now get in front of your federal human sooner with the exclusive Players and Layers method from Judy Bratt and Summit Insight. Connect with her on LinkedIn and find out more, or visit growfedbiz.com today. If you're interested in selling to the federal government, you may need a contract vehicle. The most popular one is the GSA schedule. Learn more about the requirements, the proposal process, and how this contract vehicle may or may not be the right tool for you. Jennifer Schaus is teaching a series of classes, as you can see here, with the Virginia PTAC and Mary Washington University. All classes are listed on our website under the events section with the registration link. Okay, now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information can be found on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 23,000 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on your screen. I also wanted to inform you of a new series in 2021. We have launched a monthly series this year called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month, and these take place on the second Friday of each month this year at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen, and then we'll take your live questions about that topic. So, for example, our panelists covered bid protests this month, and next month, on April 9th, our panelists will be covering team agreements. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals, and you can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available, and you can email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit with pricing details. Also note that you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount on each webinar. Okay, now to introduce our speaker, Dennis Callahan. Welcome, Dennis. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Hi, good morning. So I'm calling in from the Bay Area in San Francisco. It's morning here, and thankfully we're moving into the orange tier, so the kids will be going back to school very soon. So an interesting year. I was happy to grab the presentation on FAR Part 12 and DFARS Part 212 because it's such a big deal in defense contracts. So the use of, just to give you an overview, the use of commercial item procedures now hovers around 20% of all DoD procurements and accounts for about $50 billion in spending every year. It's even though it's termed commercial items, that's a little bit of a misnomer because about half of that spending is on products and half of it is on services. A little bit over, about 55% on products. And that is the sort of leading products are sustainment, supplies and equipment, electronics and communications equipment is pretty big, and then other subsistence items such as clothing, textiles, etc. On the services side, the big user is engineering and technical support, electronics and communication services, and medical services, including distribution. As far as the DoD uses of Part 212 procedures, DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, leads the way, followed by the services, predominantly the Army, and then the Air Force and the Navy following up. So commercial item contracting is, it's not a plurality. The FAR Part 15 non-commercial items is sort of, it's a sort of a typical defense procurement, but FAR Part 12, DFARS Part 212, certainly a big part of defense contracting. Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay, one more. Okay, so just sort of my my own interest here is a pretty interesting historical lesson of commercial item contracting. It starts before the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act of 1994, and it sort of evolved out of this notion that the DoD was driving research and development and primarily buying unique items from defense contractors unnecessarily, and was not leveraging the commercial sector as well as it could. So sort of during the Reagan era escalation in Cold War defense contracting in the early 80s, the defense budget was up 40%. And I think a lot of people on this call will sort of have sort of a general sense of hearing about the $400 hammers and the $500 toilet seats that were supposedly purchased as unique government items. That's sort of somewhat apocryphal when you get into the facts of those purchases, and just went to allocations of cost. But I think the point is well taken that much of what the government uses is the same as what industry and consumers use as well. So the Reagan administration impaneled this Packard Commission. I think that was, let's say, 1983, and it was to study defense acquisition among other managerial and administrative processes in the Defense Department. Mr. Packard was David Packard of Hewlett-Packard, and one of the notions that came out of the Packard Commission was to sort of better leverage products that are in the commercial place as opposed to designing unique systems. So among the recommendations that came out of the Packard Commission was an expanded use of the acquisition of commercial products, and sort of another one that has a big bearing on the sort of the move towards commercializing procurement in the defense industry, in the Department of Defense, was the creation of, or a recommendation which was implemented to create the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition. And this official is responsible for overall policy, research and development, procurement, logistics, testing, and it had the effect of sort of professionalizing and rationalizing defense procurements, and in particular, make versus buy decisions. So next slide, please. So after the Packard Commission, the next big marker on the road to FASA was Vice President Gore's National Performance Review in 1993, and was looking to sort of streamline acquisitions to make them more business-like. There was this, these hammer awards that he gave if you could hammer out wasteful processes and practices of the federal government. I was fortunate enough to get one of those back in an earlier career, and sort of one of the ways you could do that was to use commercial item procurement as opposed to detailed specifications. And so sort of at the same time that the federal government was undertaking these efforts to identify and to use commercial item procurements to a greater degree, they are also identifying sort of inherently government functions, and this was through a process of what they called A76 studies. And so back at this time in the early 90s, I was working for the U.S. Mint, which is under the Department of Treasury. It's one of the few federal agencies that actually make anything. And so they make both numismatic and circulating coins. And on the numismatic side, the U.S. Mint before this point would go through these very detailed specifications on how they want jewel cases, sort of the little plastic cases that go around numismatic coins, and the boxes that they went in, the felts and all that. But it was very similar to what jewelry case manufacturers make. So there was a push in my agency to towards commercial item purchasing at this time, and then also on the sort of the related idea of inherently governmental functions. Previously, going back into the 70s, the U.S. Mint did everything soup to nuts. They would start with ingots, and they would founder it and have their own rolling mills, and they would stamp out the planchets, and then they would make coins that way. At this time, the A76 study in the Mint said, well, what's inherently governmental about making coinage? Well, it's the die making and it's the actual stamping of the coins. And so bye-bye all that other stuff. The foundries went away, the rolling mills went away, and so the mint ended up either just buying the planchets, the little blank pieces of metal that get stamped out, or the rolled metal where the government, the mint, would stamp out the coin blanks and then stamp them themselves. So it's very sort of a interesting history lesson on how this all came about and where the drive towards commercial item procurement came along. The next slide, please. So the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, October 1994. This is really a big date in federal contracting. One of the driving forces coming out of this was that the government must buy commercially when reasonably practicable, is the term in the statute. And the sort of animating rationales for this was to have, put your federal spending dollars into actually acquiring items and reduce unnecessary government-funded research and development, reduce the cost and time entailed in preparing detailed design specs, and reduce costly and time-consuming and non-productive product testing. And all of this sort of condenses the acquisition cycle time. And so, the idea of removing barriers to commercial item contracting, it saves time, money, reduces risk, and by reducing risk, there's an overwhelming presumption that this is going to lead to firm fixed price contracting. So 98% of commercial item contracting is under a firm fixed price basis, where it shifts the risk onto the vendor and away from the government, as opposed to having cost type contracts. So like I said, 98% is firm fixed price or firm fixed price with an economic price adjustment clause, and there's only 2% is on a time and materials basis. And so the notion of having requirements defined to allow commercial items to meet the need, that sort of brings more flexibility into the how requirements are defined, and that's where the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition comes in a lot of instances, because it's not as protective of the individual agencies, as far as having a sense that they're doing something unique. So you have an undersecretary who's in charge of saying, really what of the products and services that you use are really specific to your agency versus what can be met by commercial item contracting. Next slide, please. So about a year later, FAR Part 12 comes in. There's not a lot. I'm going to be speaking mostly in terms of defense procurement. There's not a lot of sort of meaningful variations in the DFARS Part 212. I'll bring those up as they come along. So the goal of FAR Part 12 is to mimic the commercial marketplace to the extent allowed under federal contracting rules. And that means that a lot of the FAR provisions are exempted from commercial item purchases. Some important exceptions, or what's exempt: certified cost and pricing data, cost accounting standards, all of this sort of type of non-productive work that goes to pricing cost type contracts. Intellectual property rights are streamlined. The changes clause, that's a big one, so no unilateral changes. So the idea that you're using commercial terms means that changes have to be by mutual consent of both the government and the vendor. But some things still apply in commercial item procurements. Socioeconomic policy, so some small business rules, equal employment opportunity, veteran opportunities, some reporting and auditing. So if you're doing commercial item procurements on the vendor side, you still have to report some of your executive compensation. That's not a typical commercial term. Domestic sourcing, so the Buy American Act, Trade Agreements Act, U.S. flag carrier provisions for how you transport goods transoceanically. False Claims Act, that's always a big one from the vendor side. And so, under FAR 12301, as far as commercial terms, to the extent practical, you only use required FAR provisions when you have to, and you use terms that are consistent with customary commercial practices. And the sort of list of all of the included terms in FAR Part 12, you can find those at FAR 52-214-4. Next slide, please. So what is a commercial item? It isn't necessarily the very same product that is, or service that's used or purchased in the commercial marketplace. It's product of a type, and so that of a type is a very important qualifier here. So it's of a type that's customarily used by the general public, offered for sale, lease, or license to general public, including items evolved from types used by the general public, and those with minor modifications. On the services side, same idea. So if the service is sold competitively in substantial quantities in the commercial marketplace, it's based on established prices. So some of the things or types of services that are sort of traditional, easily defined commercial items are installation services, maintenance and repair services, training services, etc. There are two sort of prerequisites for a commercial item determination. It's what you sort of have to do to prove commerciality. So the contracting officer will say, well, as they're looking at this, if they're sort of determining whether they're able to use the streamlined FAR Part 12 commercial item procurement, they have to make this commercial item determination. And so they have to do market research. And so for For instance, for DoD commercial item purchases over $1 million, they have to document their market research in the contract file. They also, and I'm going to get to market research a little bit later on in more detail, and the contracting officer also must make a price reasonableness determination. So the idea is that you're allowing the marketplace and the commerciality of a product to create efficiencies. Competition will drive prices down, and so the contracting officer must have do some research into market prices that evolve out of a competitive environment. So the typical price reasonableness determination emerges out of competition, but if that doesn't exist, they can use other information that's other than commercial, other than certified cost and pricing data, which you have in cost type contracts. But that's usually, essentially boils down to cost and pricing data, but without a certification. Next slide, please. So what is, an of a type product? So it looks to the physical characteristics of the requirement and compares it to commercial items. So if the primary purpose of this of the item is commercial, then it's a commercial item, and if not, it's not a commercial item. So if it's a uniquely government item, if it doesn't exist in the commercial marketplace, and then you're on the sort of non-commercial item side. And then contracting officers can also look to see if it's produced on the same line as items sold commercially. And so you get into some questions about, okay, it's mostly on the same line, but there are some modifications that can still be an of a type commercial item product. Next slide, please. I think it's always helpful to look at a couple of examples just to give a better sense of what I'm talking about here. And so these items come out of the DoD guidebook for acquiring commercial items, which is really a sort of a Bible for this type of for what commercial item procurements are. So, for instance, an example there is that all helicopters have this automatic direction finding antenna, but the ones that are on the Black Hawk helicopter have a unique size and shape. And so several vendors sell these types of antennas commercially, and the contracting officer had a question about whether these Black Hawk specific ADF antenna were commercial items. Were they of a type? And so the contractor looked at the form and function of the commercial antennas, compared it to the Black Hawk requirement, and determined that it was a commercial item, even if it was not sold in the commercial marketplace. So you don't look at the potential to use FAR Part 12 narrowly. If it's of a type, you can still use it. Other examples, ruggedized computers. So if you have your Dell, whatever model 3280 laptop, if the Army is going to need some of those laptops on the front lines, and they have to be able to be jostled around in the pack for days on end, or dropped and still be usable if they're ruggedized, even though that ruggedization process even if it doesn't exist in the commercial marketplace, the computer itself does, and that type of modification does not take that computer outside of the commercial item designation. Cark paint is another one that I've run into in my in my career. So if you have a Jeep that needs cark paint, that's chemical agent resistance coating, that the chemical agents don't adhere to it and can just be more easily washed off than regular commercial paint, well, it's still a Jeep or a container or whatever is coated in cark paint, still a commercial item. One other thing to sort of keep in mind here is that the system as a whole does not define whether an item will be a commercial item or not. And so a lot of commercial items are purchased under FAR Parts 13, 14, and 15, either through a prime contract or subcontract that are components of a larger system. So, for instance, if you think of a huge aircraft carrier that has some of the planes on a lower deck and they're elevated up to the flight deck through an elevator system that might exist in the commercial marketplace. Well, that elevator system, the government doesn't have to go out and design all the specifications for that. They can still leverage the commercial marketplace to have that subsystem within a larger system. Next slide, please. On the services side, as stated earlier, there are easy cases for stuff that you see in your offices on a fairly routine basis, whether it's installation, maintenance, repair, training services, food service, storage and distribution. So the Department of Defense buys, $10 billion worth of pharmaceuticals, and those, the contracts for the distribution of those pharmaceuticals to DoD hospitals or to, commissary pharmacies. Those same services are purchased by the hospital systems and CVSs of the world. That is a commercial service. The other thing I wanted to mention here is, even if it's a non-commercial item, you can have commercial services associated with that commercial item. So take, for instance, a U.S. Air Force transport fixed-wing aircraft. Even if that is a unique non-commercial item to the Air Force, the maintenance of that aircraft, the aircraft mechanics, some of the spare parts ordering, etc., those can still be commercial item procurements. So it's not as if the system defines the nature of the follow-on contracts. Next slide, please. So the last two things I'm going to discuss here are the market research and that is a necessary part of FAR Part 12 commercial item procurements, and what follows on from that is the definition of the agency needs under FAR Part 11. So FAR Part 10, FAR Part 11. So to encourage market research is geared towards encouraging competition, and it's in support of commercial item determinations. Importantly, on the DoD side, in recent years, has been an update to the DFARS that allows previous commercial item determinations to serve as the basis for future commercial item determinations, so that contracting officer doesn't have to sort of reinvent the wheel to make a commercial item determination every time the purchase of the same product or services come up. So the market research, it's based on the outcomes sought. So if the government wants to buy pickup trucks, let's say, they're going to look at the need to bring, to haul a certain amount of weight or of a certain volume or number of passengers, et cetera. They're going to, look to see what they want to accomplish with the procurement, not sort of defining it, looking at a sort of a design specifications focus or vantage point. So the market research, the contracting officer goes out, determines if there's sources that supply or meet that outcome sought in the commercial marketplace, and determines whether if the commercial items don't particularly exist, whether they can be made to exist with reasonable modifications, or if at sort of a subcomponent level of commercial items can satisfy portions of the requirement of larger purchases. And so the market research also looks at commercial item terms, warranties, maintenance, discounts, financing, and other benefits that can be monetized. So looking to see, if the government can get can negotiate a lower price because the government doesn't need financing for its purchases. It's sort of determining what a market price would be, and whether a commercial item is going to meet the need, and if so, how do you determine price reasonableness? So at a minimum, the techniques used in market research is to have an governmental expert who's familiar with the industry, but typically it goes beyond that. It can include industry conferences, industry days. Maybe people on the call have participated in those. RFIs, requests for information, that goes out to industry in whatever the product or services is, or sources sought notices, which will generally sort of outline what the government's requirement is and ask industry whether they can meet that requirement, and also looking through industry publications, depending on whatever the product is. And so that's sort of a general overview of FAR Part 10. It's sort of a fraught area that comes up in bid protests every now and again. So it's quite a lot to that. Next slide, please. So the other corollary, sort of a precursor to FAR Part 12, is FAR Part 11, which sort of details the processes for describing the agency needs. So starting from the FAR Part 10 market research, you can promote competition by limiting restrictive provisions. So you state the requirements in terms of functions, performance requirements, and essential physical characteristics. So going back to the pickup example, the government would look at how many passengers and payload and range they would need for a particular vehicle, and they wouldn't specify, the engine size or torque or, give design specifications for a lift gate. That's not taking advantage of the commercial marketplace. And so you're defining requirements in a way that encourages the use of commercial items and gets away from government unique items. And it also encourages standardization in the use of items that are accepted by the commercial marketplace. And when describing agency needs, it's sort of an easy thing to say, okay, give me a Ford F-150, but you don't want to, FAR Part 11, it discourages the use of brand name descriptions. So if Dodge or GMC or Toyota Tacoma would do, you have to justify the use of a brand name description, and it always has to have sort of an or equal modifier. And so you're not, you're not encouraging competition in the use of commercial items if you're defining your needs so particularly as to limit it to a single source of that supply or service. And so that's sort of a general, very high level view of commercial item contracting. It's, streamlined acquisitions, but, it's still, there are protests available under commercial item procurements. We get involved in those quite regularly. And then also in the contract performance side, things come up. So it certainly is, I would say, the government's most efficient way of purchasing items, but there's still room for disagreement. And so that's, I'm going to hand it back over to Hunter now. And thank you for participating.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And thank you to everyone who attended this webinar and were able to join us. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us next week as we uncover more parts of the DFARS.